The crash had been violent, metal screaming against alien stone as Kira's escape pod carved a burning scar across the forest floor. Steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines while warning lights bathed the cramped interior in crimson urgency. Her four-fingered hands trembled as she worked the emergency release, her pale blue skin glistening with perspiration that smelled faintly of copper and ozone. The planet's atmosphere registered as breathable on her scanner, though the gravity felt heavier than her homeworld's gentle pull. Kira emerged from the wreckage on unsteady legs, her large violet eyes scanning the towering trees that stretched impossibly high above her diminutive frame. At barely 4 feet tall, she felt dwarfed by this world's scale. Everything here seemed designed for giants. The sound of approaching footsteps sent her scrambling behind the twisted remains of her pod. Heavy, measured steps that spoke of a large creature moving with purpose. Kira's training kicked in. She was a xenobiologist, not a warrior, but every species in the galaxy knew the stories of this sector's apex predators, the humans. When the creature emerged from between the trees, Kira's breath caught in her throat. It stood nearly twice her height, its pale skin stretched over an impossibly robust frame. Dark hair covered its head in wild tangles, and when it turned toward her hiding spot, she glimpsed eyes the color of her homeworld's summer sky. The human wore simple clothing that did nothing to hide the raw power in its movements, each step deliberate and controlled. Kira had seen the footage from the war zones, watched humans tear through enemy lines with nothing but primitive weapons, and an inexplicable refusal to die. Their species had earned their reputation through centuries of conquest, their homeworld a death world that had forged them into living weapons. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, hoping her smaller size might provide some protection. The human, male, she determined from its build, approached the crash site with obvious caution. It circled the wreckage like a predator sizing up potential prey, those blue eyes taking in every detail. When it spotted her scanner lying where she'd dropped it in her panic, the creature picked up the device with surprising gentleness, examining the alien technology with what almost looked like curiosity rather than aggression. "Hello?" The voice that emerged from the human's throat was deeper than any sound her species could produce, yet it carried an odd, questioning tone. "Is someone there? I saw your ship come down." Kira remained frozen. The universal translator embedded in her skull converted the words automatically, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. This was a human, one of the galaxy's most feared predators, and she was alone and defenseless on its homeworld. The male set her scanner down carefully on a nearby rock and took several steps backward, raising his massive hands in what her xenobiology training suggested might be a gesture of non-aggression. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice softer now. "My name is Tom. I live about a mile from here. If you're injured, I can help." Despite every instinct screaming at her to remain hidden, Kira found herself studying the human's posture. There was no tension in those broad shoulders, no predatory crouch that might signal an impending attack. Instead, Tom sat down on a fallen log, making himself smaller, less threatening. The gesture was so unexpected that Kira forgot to breathe for a moment. 3 days passed before Kira worked up the courage to emerge from her hiding places long enough to retrieve the supplies Tom left near the crash site. Food appeared daily. Simple items wrapped in what appeared to be organic material. Water in containers that showed signs of careful cleaning. Small items that might provide comfort. A soft fabric that smelled faintly of something pleasant. Fire-starting materials for warmth. Tom himself appeared twice each day, morning and evening, following the same routine. He would approach the crash site slowly, announce his presence in that deep voice, leave supplies, and retreat to what he called a safe distance. He spoke to the air around her hiding spots, maintaining a one-sided conversation that covered everything from local weather patterns to descriptions of his daily activities. "The lake's about half a mile east if you need fresh water," he'd said on the second day. "Though I'll keep bringing you what I can. The fish are running upstream now. It's quite a sight if you're interested in local wildlife." Kira had been interested. Her xenobiology training made her curious about any planet's ecosystem, but her fear kept her hidden among the twisted metal and emergency shelters she'd constructed from salvageable pod components. She watched Tom through gaps in the wreckage, studying his movements with the intensity of a scientist observing a potentially dangerous specimen. What she saw confused her. The human moved with the controlled power she'd expected, but there was something else. A carefulness that seemed at odds with his species' reputation. When he placed her daily supplies, his large hands handled everything with surprising delicacy. He never approached closer than 30 feet to her known hiding spots. And when he spoke, his voice remained consistently gentle, despite its intimidating depth. On the third evening, something changed in Tom's routine. He arrived at the usual time, but seemed agitated, his blue eyes scanning the tree line with obvious concern. "There's been unusual animal activity in the area," he announced to her hiding place. "Big predator, probably a mountain cat. They don't usually come down this low, but something's got this one spooked. I'm going to stay nearby tonight, just in case." Kira's blood chilled. She'd studied this planet's fauna during her approach. The mountain cats were apex predators nearly as feared as the humans themselves, capable of taking down prey 3 times their size with terrifying efficiency. Her small frame would barely constitute a snack for such a creature. True to his word, Tom set up what appeared to be a simple camp about 50 yards from the crash site. She watched him work with practiced efficiency, building a small fire and arranging his supplies. As darkness fell, she heard him moving about, but the sounds were strangely reassuring rather than threatening. Near midnight, the human's behavior changed dramatically. Tom rose from his resting position with fluid grace, every line of his body suddenly radiating lethal intent. The transformation was so complete that Kira barely recognized the gentle giant who'd been leaving her food. This was the apex predator she'd expected to encounter. Dangerous, focused, and absolutely terrifying. A low growl echoed from the darkness beyond the firelight, answered by a sound from Tom's throat that made Kira's bones vibrate with primitive fear. The human had just challenged another apex predator to single combat, and every instinct screamed that she was about to witness something that would give her nightmares for years. But as the mountain cat emerged into the flickering light, a creature of shadow and muscle that stood nearly as tall as Tom's shoulder, Kira realized she wasn't just witnessing a confrontation between predators. She was seeing exactly why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most terrifying species. The mountain cat was magnificent and terrible, its silver-gray coat rippling over muscles designed for explosive violence. Yellow eyes fixed on Tom with the calculating intelligence of an apex predator that had never encountered meaningful resistance. The creature's shoulders stood level with the human's chest, and when it opened its mouth to snarl, fangs longer than Kira's fingers caught the firelight. Tom didn't retreat. Instead, he spread his stance slightly and let out another of those bone-deep growls that seemed to emanate from his very core. The sound spoke of countless generations of predators who had clawed their way to the top of evolution's ladder, and it made the mountain cat pause with obvious uncertainty. "Not tonight," Tom said, his voice carrying a deadly certainty that made Kira's skin crawl. "Find easier prey." The cat circled left, testing for weakness, and Tom turned with it in a deadly dance that spoke of perfect spatial awareness. His hands remained at his sides, but every line of his body radiated controlled violence. This wasn't the gentle giant who'd been leaving her food. This was humanity stripped down to its essential nature. Kira understood now why her people's military briefings had classified humans as a Class Alpha threat. The confrontation stretched across long minutes, neither predator willing to give ground. The mountain cat possessed natural weapons and the advantage of home territory. But Tom had something else, an absolute refusal to show fear or submission. When the cat feinted forward, testing his resolve, the human didn't flinch or step back. Instead, he stepped forward. The movement was small but unmistakable, and its effect on the mountain cat was immediate. The creature's ears flattened against its skull as it processed what it had just witnessed. Most prey animals retreated when confronted by superior predators. Tom had done the opposite, essentially declaring himself the greater threat in this encounter. For several heartbeats, the two apex predators stood locked in their deadly stalemate. Then, almost anticlimactically, the mountain cat began to back away. Its movements remained controlled and dignified. This wasn't flight, but a tactical withdrawal. The creature had recognized that Tom wasn't prey, but a fellow apex predator defending his territory. As the cat melted back into the darkness, Tom maintained his aggressive posture for several more minutes, listening to sounds Kira couldn't detect. Only when he was completely satisfied that the threat had departed did his stance begin to relax. The sort of transformation back to his gentler demeanor was almost as startling as the original change had been. Tom rolled his shoulders, ran a hand through his dark hair, and returned to his simple camp as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. "Sorry about the noise," he called toward Kira's hiding place, his voice returning to the careful gentleness she'd grown accustomed to. "He's gone now. You can rest easy." From her concealment, Kira stared at the human in complete bewilderment. She'd just witnessed him face down one of this planet's apex predators through sheer force of will, demonstrating exactly why humans were feared across the galaxy. The display of controlled aggression had been absolutely terrifying, a reminder that the gentle behavior she'd observed was a choice rather than weakness. But now Tom sat by his fire, carefully tending the flames to ensure they'd provide warmth and light through the remaining hours of darkness. He arranged his sleeping area to provide the best possible sight lines to her crash site, positioning himself as a barrier between her hiding place and any potential threats. The dichotomy was staggering. This creature could shift from deadly predator to protective guardian in mere moments, and something about that realization sent unfamiliar emotions churning through Kira's chest. For the first time since her crash, she found herself considering the possibility that her initial assessment might have been wrong. Tom wasn't just another human apex predator looking for easy prey. He was something else entirely, something her xenobiology training hadn't prepared her to understand. As she settled in for what remained of the night, Kira made a decision that would have horrified her just hours earlier. Tomorrow, she was going to try talking to him. Dawn broke through the canopy in shafts of golden light that turned the forest into something magical. Kira had barely slept, her mind churning with the implications of what she'd witnessed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Tom's transformation from gentle giant to apex predator, and back again, the ease with which he'd shifted between roles, speaking to depths she was only beginning to understand. Tom's morning routine proceeded as usual. The careful approach, the soft announcement of his presence, the placement of supplies. But today, as he prepared to retreat to his respectful distance, Kira made a choice that terrified her. "Wait." The single word emerged from her hiding place in a voice barely above a whisper, but the effect on Tom was immediate. He froze mid-step, his entire body going still with the controlled stillness of a predator recognizing the presence of prey. For a heartbeat, Kira wondered if she'd made a fatal mistake. Then Tom slowly turned toward the wreckage, those blue eyes scanning for her location with careful intensity. When he spoke, his voice carried the same gentle tone she'd grown accustomed to, but now she could hear the underlying power it contained. "Hello," he said simply. "I'm glad you're ready to talk." Kira remained hidden for several more seconds, gathering her courage. When she finally emerged from behind a section of twisted hull plating, she saw Tom's eyes widen slightly at his first clear look at her. She supposed she must seem impossibly small and fragile to a creature of his size, her pale blue skin and violet eyes marking her as obviously alien, her diminutive frame emphasizing her vulnerability. "My name is Kira," she said, her universal translator converting her words into his language. I'm a scientist, a xenobiologist." Tom nodded slowly, making no move to approach closer. "I wondered about your profession. The scanner you dropped had biological sampling attachments." He gestured toward the device, which still sat where he'd placed it days earlier. "Are you studying our world?" The question surprised her with its intelligence. Her training had emphasized human aggression and territorial behavior, but it had said little about their capacity for logical deduction or genuine curiosity. "I was supposed to," Kira admitted, her hands trembling slightly as she stepped fully into the open. "My ship was damaged during atmospheric entry. The escape pod systems barely functioned during landing." "You're hurt." Tom's observation was immediate, his eyes picking up on details she thought she'd hidden. "The way you're favoring your left side suggests broken or cracked ribs, and you've been eating very little of the food I've brought." Kira's hand moved instinctively to her injured ribs, surprised by his perceptiveness. "The food. It's not that it isn't good. My species has different nutritional requirements. Some of what you've brought could make me ill. Understanding flickered across Tom's features. I should have realized. Different biology. Different needs. He seemed to consider something. If you could provide me with information about what your species requires, I could find appropriate alternatives. The forest provides many options. The offer was so unexpectedly thoughtful that Kira found herself staring at him in confusion. Why would you help me? Your species. The reputation humans have. Tom's expression grew serious, and for a moment, she glimpsed something deeper in those blue eyes. Something that looked almost like sadness. Reputations aren't always accurate, he said quietly. We're not the monsters the galaxy believes us to be. At least, not all of us, not all the time. But last night, Kira said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I saw you face that predator. You were terrifying. Tom nodded slowly. I can be, when necessary. We all can. But that's not who we choose to be when we don't have to fight. He sat down on his usual log, making himself smaller, less threatening. That's the difference, Kira. We choose when to be monsters. Right now, I'm choosing to be something else. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and something inside Kira's chest began to unknot for the first time since her crash. She took a tentative step closer, then another, until only 20 feet separated them. The medical kit in my pod is damaged, she said carefully. My ribs, they're not healing properly. Tom's eyes sharpened with concern. I have some medical supplies at my cabin. Basic things, but they might help. Would you trust me to look at the injury? The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Kira studied his face, seeing genuine concern alongside the careful distance he maintained. This human apex predator was offering to provide medical assistance to a member of an alien species, asking for her trust despite knowing she feared him. Yes, she said, the word surprising her with its certainty. I think I would. The walk to Tom's cabin revealed more about human nature than Kira's xenobiology training had prepared her for. Tom maintained a careful distance ahead of her, moving at a pace that accommodated her shorter stride, while constantly scanning their surroundings for potential threats. When she stumbled over an exposed root, he was there instantly to steady her, his large hands gentle despite their obvious strength. Easy, he murmured. And there was something in his voice that reminded her of how her own people spoke to frightened younglings. The path gets easier ahead. His cabin was a revelation in itself, a structure that seemed to grow from the forest rather than intrude upon it. Solar collectors discreetly positioned among the trees powered systems that hummed quietly in the background, while the building's design incorporated the natural flow of wind and light. Inside, everything was scaled for Tom's size but organized with a precision that spoke of scientific thinking. You're an engineer, Kira observed, studying the technical manuals and diagnostic equipment that occupied one wall. Environmental systems. Specialist, Tom confirmed, retrieving a medical kit that was considerably more advanced than she'd expected. I help terraform worlds for colonization. Or rather, I used to. Something in his tone suggested this was a painful subject. I've been on leave for the past year. The medical examination was conducted with professional competence that impressed her. Tom's large hands proved surprisingly deft as he used his scanner to assess her injuries, and his diagnosis matched her own self-assessment exactly. 3. Cracked ribs, significant bruising to the surrounding tissue, and some internal swelling that's preventing proper healing, he said, preparing a treatment injection. This will help with the inflammation and accelerate bone repair. Your species' physiology is similar enough to ours that the medication should be compatible. Kira watched him work, noting how he explained each step of the treatment process and asked for her consent before proceeding. This was not the behavior of a predator toying with prey, but of a medical professional providing care to a patient. Why? Did you leave your job? She asked as the medication began to ease her pain. Tom's hands stilled for a moment. There was an incident on Kepler 442b, a terraforming project where the calculations were wrong. His voice grew quiet. The atmospheric processors were supposed to create a breathable environment for the colonists. Instead, they poisoned the air. 200 families died before we could correct the problem. Understanding dawned on Kira. You blame yourself. I should have caught the error, Tom said simply. It was my responsibility to verify the biological compatibility matrices. 200 people died because I missed something. Kira studied his profile as he packed away the medical supplies. The guilt he carried was etched in every line of his face, and suddenly his gentleness made perfect sense. This human had witnessed the consequences of his species' capacity for destruction, even when that destruction was unintentional. Is that why you helped me? She asked. Because you couldn't save them? Tom met her eyes directly. Maybe. Or maybe I helped you, because it was the right thing to do. He paused, considering. Does the motivation matter if the outcome is positive? The question sparked something in Kira's scientific mind. In xenobiology, we study behavioral patterns to understand species characteristics. Your behavior doesn't match the patterns we've documented for humans. What patterns would those be? Aggression, territoriality, exploitation of weaker species, Kira recited from her training. Humans are classified as apex predators with limited capacity for interspecies cooperation. Tom smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. Have you considered that your data might be incomplete? Scientific observation can be skewed by selection bias. Kira blinked, recognizing the validity of his point. You're suggesting that our observations of human behavior have been limited to military encounters and territorial disputes. When did your people first encounter humans? Tom asked. During the Antares conflict, approximately 50 years ago. War, zones, Tom nodded. You've been studying us at our worst, in situations where violence was not only expected but necessary for survival. That would be like us judging your entire species based on how your soldiers behave during combat. The comparison hit her like a revelation. Everything her people knew about humans came from conflict situations where their predatory nature would naturally be dominant. She'd never considered what they might be like during peaceful circumstances. You're not what I expected, she admitted. Neither are you, Tom replied. Your people describe themselves as a peaceful scientific culture, but you've been preparing for war against us for decades. Perhaps we're both more complex than our reputations suggest. As evening approached, Tom prepared a meal using ingredients he'd gathered from the forest, items he'd carefully selected based on her species' nutritional requirements. The gesture was so thoughtful that Kira found herself relaxing completely for the first time since her arrival on Earth. Tom, she said, as they shared the simple meal, what happens when my people come looking for me? His expression grew serious. That depends on whether they come as scientists or soldiers. Over the following days, Kira's recovery progressed rapidly under Tom's care. The human proved to be an excellent host, adapting his living space to accommodate her smaller size and different needs. He constructed a sleeping area scaled to her proportions, modified his food preparation to suit her dietary requirements, and even jury-rigged a communication system to help her attempt contact with her ship. But it was their conversations that truly changed her understanding of his species. Your people's expansion across the galaxy, Kira said one evening as they sat by his fireplace. Our analysts interpret it as aggressive territorial acquisition, but you describe it differently. Tom nodded, poking at the fire with a metal rod. We call it the diaspora. After we nearly destroyed our homeworld through warfare and environmental damage, we realized we needed to spread out to survive as a species. Not conquest, survival. But the conflicts with other species usually happen when we encounter civilizations that see us as threats, Tom explained. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They attack us because they expect us to attack them, and we defend ourselves, which confirms their initial assessment. Kira considered this. A cycle of misunderstanding reinforced by fear. Exactly. And once violence starts, both sides see only the worst in each other. Tom met her eyes. You were terrified of me when we first met. If I had responded to your fear with aggression, what would you have concluded about human nature? That you were exactly the monster I expected you to be. And if you had attacked me out of that fear? Kira felt a chill run through her. You would have defended yourself, and I would have died believing humans were savage killers. The tragedy is that both conclusions would have felt completely justified to the people drawing them. Their discussions ranged across philosophy, science, and culture. Kira learned that humans possessed a complex civilization, with rich artistic traditions, sophisticated ethical frameworks, and scientific achievements that rivaled her own people's accomplishments. Tom, in turn, showed genuine fascination with her research and her species' approach to xenobiology. "Your people study other species to understand them," he observed. "Ours tend to study them to understand ourselves, where we fit in the larger scheme of evolution and consciousness." "Both approaches have merit," Kira replied. "Perhaps that's why this conversation is possible. We're both trying to understand, rather than dominate." On the fifth day, Tom's communication equipment detected an incoming signal. Kira's rescue ship had arrived in the system and was scanning for her pod's location. The reality of impending separation brought unexpected emotions to the surface. "They'll want a full report," Kira said, her voice uncertain. "A complete analysis of human behavior based on our interaction." "What will you tell them?" Kira looked at him. This human who had shown her nothing but kindness, who had protected her from predators, and nursed her back to health, who had challenged everything she thought she knew about his species. The truth, that individual humans are capable of extraordinary gentleness and compassion, even toward aliens they have no reason to trust. And will they believe you? Some will. Others will assume I've been deceived or compromised. Kira felt sadness settle in her chest. Change happens slowly in scientific communities. Paradigm shifts require overwhelming evidence. Tom smiled sadly. Then perhaps this is just the beginning. One conversation between our species that ends differently than the others. That night, as they prepared for the arrival of Kira's rescue ship, Tom made an unexpected proposal. "Come with me to the landing site," he said. "Let your people see us together, see how we interact. It might carry more weight than a written report." The suggestion terrified Kira. Presenting Tom to her rescue team would put him at enormous risk. Her people's military protocols treated any human as a potential threat to be neutralized, but it would also provide the kind of direct evidence that could begin to shift perceptions. "They might try to capture you," she warned. "Or worse." "I know," Tom said simply. "But if we want to break the cycle of fear and misunderstanding, someone has to take the first risk." Looking into his blue eyes, Kira saw the same courage that had faced down the mountain cat, but directed toward a completely different kind of confrontation. Tom was willing to risk everything for the possibility of peace between their species. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "We'll meet them together." The rescue ship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a silver teardrop, its landing systems raising clouds of dust and debris as it settled in the forest clearing Tom had selected. Kira watched from the tree line as the familiar bulk of a standard science vessel touched down, her hearts beating with anxiety and anticipation. "Remember," Tom said quietly beside her, "let them see us approach together. Don't let them separate us before we can explain." The ship's airlock cycled open with a familiar hiss, and Kira's rescue team emerged in full environmental suits despite the breathable atmosphere. Protocol demanded caution when recovering personnel from a world inhabited by apex predators. 3. Figures in the distinctive blue and silver of her people's exploration service, led by Commander Vale, a senior xenobiologist whose reputation for caution was legendary. "Kira!" Vale's voice carried clearly across the clearing through her suit's external speakers. "Step away from the human and approach the ship immediately." Instead, Kira moved closer to Tom, placing herself partially between him and the armed escort. "Commander, I need to report significant findings regarding human behavioral patterns. This individual has provided medical assistance and protection during my recovery period." "Kira, that's impossible," Vale replied, her tone mixing relief with concern. "Humans don't exhibit altruistic behavior toward alien species. You may be experiencing psychological conditioning from prolonged captivity." "I wasn't held captive," Kira said firmly. "Tom found me after my crash and chose to help me recover. He's been protecting me from local predators and treating my injuries." Tom stepped forward slowly, his hands clearly visible and empty. "Commander?" "Vale," he said, his translator rendering his words in Kira's language. "My name is Tom Chen. I'm an environmental systems engineer currently on extended leave. I found Kira's crash site 5 days ago and have been providing assistance since then. The escort raised their weapons, but Vale held up a hand to stop them. You speak our language. Universal translator, same as Kira uses, Tom explained, calmly. I've been learning about your people's culture and scientific methods during our conversations. Conversations? Vale's skepticism was evident even through her suit's speakers. Tom is highly intelligent, Kira interjected. He has extensive knowledge of terraforming, engineering, and biological systems. We've been exchanging information about our respective species and civilizations. For several long moments the clearing was silent except for the settling sounds of the cooling ship. Then Vale spoke again, her tone more curious than hostile. What information has he provided? Kira launched into a detailed summary of everything she'd learned about human civilization, their history of environmental recovery, their complex social structures, and their capacity for both violence and extraordinary gentleness. As she spoke, she could see Vale's body language shifting from aggressive alertness to scientific interest. These behavioral observations are inconsistent with established data, Vale said finally. Because the established data was collected exclusively from military encounters, Tom replied. You've been studying us during our worst moments and extrapolating to our entire civilization. That's... Vale paused, and Kira could practically see her commander's scientific mind processing the implications. That would represent a significant methodological flaw in our research protocols. It would, Kira agreed. And if our goal is genuine understanding rather than threat assessment, we need to expand our observational parameters. Tom spoke up again. I have a proposal, if you're willing to consider it. I've been working on environmental restoration, projects that could benefit from your people's biotechnology expertise. Perhaps we could arrange a small-scale collaborative research effort, a few scientists from each of our species working together on shared projects. The suggestion was audacious, but Kira could see its brilliance. Joint research projects would provide extended opportunities for peaceful interaction, allowing both species to observe each other under normal circumstances rather than during conflicts. Such an arrangement would require approval from the Xenological Council, Vale said slowly, and extensive safety protocols. Of course, Tom agreed. But if successful, it could provide the foundation for broader interspecies cooperation. Vale was quiet for a long time, studying Tom with the intensity of a scientist encountering a fascinating new specimen. Finally, she turned to her escort. Stand down. We're going to conduct a proper first contact protocol. What followed was unlike anything in the historical records of either species. Instead of the careful hostility that had marked previous encounters, Kira watched her commander and Tom engage in genuine scientific discourse. They compared notes on atmospheric engineering, discussed biological adaptation strategies, and found common ground in their shared commitment to environmental restoration. As the conversation progressed, Kira realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. The first peaceful meeting between their species based on mutual respect rather than fear or necessity. Hours later, as the rescue team prepared to depart with Tom's proposal for consideration by both governments, Vale approached Kira privately. Your report will carry significant weight, the commander said. But more importantly, your willingness to trust this human may have changed the course of interspecies relations. Kira looked across the clearing to where Tom was demonstrating local plant identification techniques to one of her colleagues, both of them animated by their shared curiosity. He changed everything, she said simply. By choosing to be gentle when he could have been terrible, he showed me that we've been looking for monsters when we should have been looking for people. As her ship lifted off, carrying the seeds of a new relationship between their species, Kira watched Tom wave goodbye from the clearing below. In 6 months, she would return as part of the first joint research mission between their peoples, a mission that would eventually grow into the alliance that brought peace to their sector of the galaxy. But for now, she was simply grateful for the reminder that even the most fearsome predators could choose compassion over conquest, and that sometimes the greatest courage lay not in being strong, but in being gentle when strength would have been easier. Behind her in the ship's database, her complete behavioral analysis of human nature would challenge decades of established xenobiological doctrine. But more than that, it would serve as proof that understanding was always possible when fear gave way to curiosity. and that the first step toward peace was often as simple as choosing trust over terror. The galaxy was full of monsters, but it was also full of people like Tom, and sometimes that made all the difference.